I never thought the cruelest betrayal of my life would unfold in a garden filled with fairy lights, champagne glasses, and the gentle hum of celebration. But there I stood, at my own daughter's engagement party, surrounded by 200 guests who had come to witness love and new beginnings. When my son-in-law-to-be looked me straight in the eye and told me I wasn't welcome at the ceremony. His voice carried across the manicured lawn loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. He said his fiancée, my own daughter Emma, had decided that my presence would ruin their special day. The humiliation burned through me like acid, but what hurt more was watching Emma stand beside him, silent and unmoved, as if I were nothing more than an uninvited stranger who had crashed their perfect evening. In that moment, standing alone while whispers rippled through the crowd, I understood something that changed me forever. I was no longer a mother to her. I was an inconvenience, an obstacle standing between them and something they wanted desperately. So I did what they least expected. I smiled gracefully, kissed Emma on the cheek as if nothing had happened, and walked out of that party with my head held high. I let them believe they had won, that I was just a weak, heartbroken mother who would fade quietly into the background. But silence, I had learned over 52 years of life, can be the most dangerous weapon of all. Because the very next morning, when my phone rang and Emma's voice coolly asked me to sign over the beach house, the property my late husband had left specifically for me, I realized the engagement party humiliation was never meant to be the end. It was just the opening move in a carefully orchestrated plan built on greed, manipulation, and the mistaken belief that I was too soft, too loving, too broken by grief to fight back. What they didn't know was that every calculated insult, every public humiliation, every whispered conversation they thought I couldn't hear had already pushed me past the point of motherly forgiveness. This isn't just a story about betrayal. This is about the moment when a woman everyone underestimated finally decides to stop protecting people who never protected her. If you stay with me until the end, you'll see how patience becomes power, how their own greed becomes their downfall, and how the future they tried to steal collapses in ways they never imagined possible. My name is Catherine Vale. I'm 52 years old, a former corporate attorney who spent 28 years building a reputation on precision, strategy, and an ability to see through people's facades. My husband James passed away 3 years ago, and since his death, I've learned that loneliness isn't the hardest thing a widow can face. Discovering that your only child views you as nothing more than an ATM machine with a pulse cuts far deeper than grief ever could. The invitation to Emma's engagement party arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a courier in a cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. I remember holding it in my hands, feeling something close to hope bloom in my chest for the first time in months. Emma had been distant since James died, her phone calls growing shorter, her visits less frequent. But I told myself it was just the natural progression of a daughter building her own life. An engagement was a milestone worth celebrating, and despite the growing canyon between us, I believed this might be our chance to rebuild what had quietly crumbled over the past 3 years. I spent an entire week preparing for that party. I had a dress specially made, a deep emerald silk that James always said brought out my eyes. I commissioned a custom gift for Emma and her fiancé Derek, a handcrafted leather photo album with their initials embossed on the cover, the kind of thoughtful present that takes time and care. I even wrote a speech, practicing it in front of the mirror until the words felt natural and warm. The kind of blessing a mother gives when she wants her daughter to know she's proud despite everything. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I arrived at the venue exactly on time. a beautiful estate with sprawling gardens and a view of the ocean in the distance. For a moment, standing at the entrance, watching the elegant guests mingle under strings of lights, I let myself believe I still belonged in my daughter's world. That illusion shattered within 10 minutes. The hostess at the entrance checked her list 3 times before finding my name, her expression shifting to something between confusion and pity. She led me through the crowd, past the main seating area where Emma's friends and Derek's business associates were gathered, past the champagne fountain and the live string quartet, past every table that mattered. We walked all the way to the back corner of the garden, near the service entrance where staff carried trays in and out of the kitchen. My table was smaller than the others, positioned partially behind a decorative hedge that blocked the view of the stage, where Emma and Derek would later make their speeches. The chairs were mismatched, the tablecloth had a small stain near the edge, and I was seated with people I had never met. Distant cousins of Derek's family, who seemed equally confused about why they had been relegated to the forgotten corner. I told myself it was a mistake, an oversight in the seating arrangements. These things happen at large events. But then I watched Emma work the room, and I knew with absolute certainty that nothing about this evening was accidental. She moved through the crowd like a queen presiding over her kingdom, her smile practiced and perfect. She embraced Derek's parents with theatrical warmth, kissed his sister's cheeks, laughed at jokes from his business partners. She welcomed strangers with more affection than she had shown me in 3 years. And when her eyes swept across the garden and landed on my corner near the service entrance, she looked straight through me as if I were invisible. No wave, no acknowledgement, nothing. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching my daughter celebrate with everyone except me. The waiters barely stopped at our table. My champagne glass remained empty, and when dinner was served, our meals arrived cold and late. I was being erased in real time, systematically removed from my own daughter's most important moment, and the cruelty of it was so precise that I knew it had been planned down to the smallest detail. Derek found me eventually, but only because I made the mistake of trying to approach Emma during a quiet moment between toasts. I had my speech prepared, my gift wrapped beautifully, and I genuinely believed that once I spoke to her directly, we could clear up whatever misunderstanding had led to this situation. I touched Emma's arm gently and said I would love to offer a few words to celebrate her engagement. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever. Derek stepped between us, his hand on Emma's waist, his expression shifting from polite to cold in an instant. He looked at me the way someone might look at an unwanted solicitor at their front door. Then he said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, "Catherine, I think it's better if you don't make a scene tonight. This is Emma's moment, and we'd prefer to keep it family only." Family only. The words hung in the air like poison. I was Emma's mother, the woman who had raised her, loved her, sacrificed everything to give her opportunities I never had, and I was being told I wasn't family. Before I could respond, before I could even process the full scope of what was happening, Derek continued in that same practiced tone. "We're all a bit worried about you, honestly. Emma mentioned you've been struggling since James passed. Memory issues, confusion, emotional instability. We understand you're going through a difficult time, but tonight needs to stay positive." I heard the gasps around us. I saw several guests exchange glances. I watched Emma stand there beside Derek, saying nothing, doing nothing, letting him dismantle me in public, while she played the role of concerned daughter, too kind to contradict him. This wasn't just cruelty. This was architecture. Every detail had been designed to humiliate me, to paint me as mentally unstable, to lay groundwork for something I couldn't yet see clearly. They were building a narrative, and I was the villain in a story they had been writing for months. James's voice came to me then, clear as the night he had said it. We had been sitting on our balcony 5 years earlier, watching Emma and Derek at a dinner party below. I had commented on how attentive Derek seemed, how he never left Emma's side. James hadn't looked away from the scene when he replied, "A man who never lets his partner out of his sight isn't protective, he's controlling. Catherine, he's possessive. Watch him carefully. Someday you might need to remember the difference." I set my untouched champagne on a nearby table. I straightened my emerald dress, the one James had loved. I walked through that garden with my head high and my spine straight, letting every person there see that I would not crumble, would not beg, would not give them the satisfaction of witnessing my breakdown. As I reached my car, I heard Emma's laughter echo across the garden, bright and carefree. She thought she had won. She had no idea that her father had prepared me for this moment 3 years before he died, and that the woman walking away from her engagement party wasn't a defeated mother. I was a strategist who had just been given all the information she needed to understand the game being played. The drive home took 35 minutes, but I don't remember most of it. My hands gripped the steering wheel. My eyes watched the road. My mind replayed every moment of that party with the clinical precision I had once used to dissect opposing counsel's arguments in court. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had already begun to see the pattern, the careful construction of a trap I had been too loving, too trusting, too blinded by grief to notice until now. My house was dark when I entered. I had left no lights on because I had expected to return late, flushed with champagne and hope, perhaps even carrying some fragile optimism that Emma and I might finally reconnect. Instead, I was home before 9 o'clock, standing in a silent foyer that still carried the faint scent of James's cologne, even after 3 years. Some nights, that scent comforted me. Tonight it felt like a summons, like my husband calling me to finally see what he had tried to warn me about years ago. I didn't turn on the living room lights. I didn't pour myself wine or collapse into tears the way they probably expected. Instead, I walked down the hallway to the small study that had been James's sanctuary during his final months. His desk still sat beneath the window exactly as he had left it. I had changed nothing in this room. His reading glasses rested on a stack of legal documents. His favorite pen, a silver Mont Blanc I had given him for our 20th anniversary, lay across a leather notebook. I lowered myself into his chair and let the silence settle around me like an old familiar coat. James had always been the perceptive one in our marriage. I dealt in law and contracts, in the concrete language of precedent and evidence. He dealt in people. He could read a room the way I read case files, identifying motivations and weaknesses that others never noticed. During his final months, when the heart disease had already begun its slow work of consuming him, that perception had sharpened into something almost eerie. He had become obsessed with watching Derek. At the time, I thought it was the medication affecting his judgment. Or perhaps the fear of leaving me alone with a son-in-law he had never fully trusted. James would sit at this very desk for hours, making notes in journals I wasn't permitted to read, making phone calls he didn't explain. When I asked what he was doing, he would smile, that knowing smile of his, and say only, "Preparing." I never pressed further. I wish now that I had. One conversation from those final weeks returned to me with sudden, devastating clarity. We had been sitting together in the garden, wrapped in blankets, despite the warm afternoon because James was always cold by then. He had taken my hand and looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that illness hadn't dimmed. "When the time comes," he said, "you'll know what to do. Everything you need is exactly where it's always been." I had assumed he meant the will, the insurance policies, the practical matters of death. Now, sitting at his desk in the darkness, I wondered if he had meant something else entirely. The phone rang at 9:45. I recognized Emma's number on the screen and felt a cold clarity settle over me. This call wasn't concern. This was reconnaissance. She wanted to assess the damage, to confirm that the humiliation had achieved its intended effect. For a moment, I considered not answering. Then I realized that silence would make her suspicious. Emma expected a broken mother. I would give her exactly what she expected. I answered on the fourth ring, letting my voice carry a slight tremor. "Hello? Mom, it's Emma." Her tone was warm, solicitous, absolutely false. "I wanted to check on you. You left the party so early, and Derek and I were worried. Are you feeling all right?" I paused longer than necessary, as if gathering my thoughts required effort. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. These big events take a lot out of me these days." "Of course they do." I could hear the satisfaction beneath her sympathy. "You know, Mom, we really should talk about getting you some help. Someone to check in on you, make sure you're managing okay. It's what Dad would have wanted." "Maybe you're right," I said, letting my voice fade slightly. "I have been so confused lately. The party was lovely, though, Emma. Thank you for inviting me." The conversation lasted another few minutes, but the substance was complete. Emma had heard what she needed to hear. A declining woman, disoriented, grateful for scraps of attention from her family. When we hung up, I knew she would immediately call Derek with her report. "The old woman is breaking down. We can move forward with the plan." I set the phone on James's desk and allowed myself a small, cold smile. For 28 years, I had served as senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. I had navigated complex litigation, survived corporate mergers, and once spent 18 months untangling a fraud case that had been designed by people far more intelligent than Derek Morrison. My reputation had been built on two qualities that most people mistook for weakness: patience and precision. Strong pause. I never made accusations without evidence. I never revealed my strategy until I was ready to win. Opponents had underestimated me throughout my career, interpreting my calm demeanor as passivity. They learned otherwise, usually far too late. James used to say I had the mind of a chess player. "You don't see the board the way other people do," he told me once. "You see 12 moves ahead, and you never let anyone know what you're planning until checkmate is inevitable." Strong pause. I had stopped playing chess when James died. I had stopped thinking strategically about anything except how to survive each day without him. Tonight, sitting at his desk surrounded by the remnants of his life, I began to think like that woman again. They thought my silence meant defeat. They didn't know it was the first move in a game James had taught me to play long before he left this world. 4 days passed before Emma made her next move. I spent that time in deliberate stillness, maintaining my routine as if nothing had changed. I tended James's garden each morning. I read the newspaper on the back porch. I answered phone calls from old colleagues with my voice steady and unremarkable. To anyone watching, I was simply a widow moving through the quiet motions of grief and retirement. But beneath that surface, my mind was working the way it had during my years in litigation, sifting through patterns, identifying strategies, waiting for the opposition to reveal their true intentions. The call came on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Emma's name appeared on my phone screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice mild and slightly confused. "Hello, sweetheart." "Mom, we need to talk about something important." Emma's tone was businesslike, rehearsed in a way that immediately sharpened my attention. I heard movement in the background, a door closing, and then Derek's voice murmuring something I couldn't quite make out. He was there, listening, perhaps coaching. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" "It's about the beach house, Dad's beach house." She paused, and I heard that murmur again, more distinct this time. Derek was feeding her lines. "Derek and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if you signed it over to us. Just for family management purposes. It would make things so much easier for everyone." I said nothing for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. In negotiations, silence is a weapon. People rush to fill empty space, and in that rush, they often reveal more than they intended. Emma took the bait. Look, Mom, you're not using it anymore. You haven't been out there since Dad died. It's just sitting empty, and honestly, with your memory issues and everything, we're worried you might forget to pay the property taxes or maintain it properly. This is about protecting Dad's legacy. Protecting Dad's legacy. The words were so perfectly calculated, so precisely designed to manipulate my grief, that I almost admired the craftsmanship. I don't know, Emma, I said carefully, keeping my voice uncertain. That's a big decision. Your father left that property specifically to me in the will. Let me think about it. What's there to think about? Her voice sharpened with frustration, and again I heard Derek's murmur in the background. She took a breath, clearly being instructed to stay calm. Mom, this is what families do. We take care of each other's assets. Derek's been through something like this before with his own family. He knows exactly how these things work. I nearly missed it. The words slipped out so casually, buried in the flow of her argument, that a less attentive listener might have let them pass without notice. But I had spent 3 decades listening for exactly these kinds of slips, the small revelations that change everything. He's been through something like this before with his own family. I filed the information away without comment, adding it to the growing pattern I had been assembling since the engagement party. I'll think about it, I said again. These things shouldn't be rushed, sweetheart. Emma tried to push further, but I remained vague and non-committal until she finally gave up. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, turning this new piece of information over in my mind. What exactly had Derek done before? What had happened with his own family that gave him such confidence in these strategies? That night, I returned to James's study. I had been spending more time there since the engagement party, finding comfort in the space where he had spent his final months. But tonight, I wasn't seeking comfort. I was searching. James had said everything I needed was where it had always been. I had assumed he meant the obvious things, the documents any spouse would leave behind. But James was never obvious. He thought in layers, in contingencies, in moves planned years in advance. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he had always kept locked. The key had been in his personal safe, and I had never thought to use it until now. Inside, beneath old contracts and photographs from our early years together, I found a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was James's, elegant despite the tremor that illness had brought to his hands in those final months. The words stopped my breath. Open when you're ready to fight back. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were 4 items. The first was a letter, several pages long, written in James's careful script. The second was a business card for someone named Victoria Ashford, private investigator, with a handwritten note on the back. My oldest friend. Trust her completely. The third was a USB drive with a single word written on the label. Evidence. The fourth item made me sit down heavily in James's chair. It was a photograph. Derek, clearly recognizable despite the image being several years old, sitting at an outdoor cafe table across from a woman I had never seen. They were leaning toward each other with the intimacy of people sharing secrets. On the back, James had written a date and a single sentence. He meets her every month. Find out who she is. My husband had been dead for 3 years, but somehow he had known exactly what would happen, and he had left me weapons I didn't even know existed. I sat in James's study until well past midnight before I found the courage to read his letter. The photograph lay face down beside me, that image of Derek with the unknown woman, too disturbing to look at twice. The USB drive rested beneath my fingertips, a digital archive of secrets I wasn't yet ready to face. And even after 3 years, seeing his handwriting made my chest ache with longing. If you're reading this, Derek has made his move. I saw it coming years before I got sick, perhaps even before Emma fully understood what kind of man she had chosen. I watched him isolate her from her college friends, from her career ambitions, from us. I watched him study our finances with a focus that had nothing to do with building a future. I watched him test your boundaries, probe your weaknesses, and calculate your worth. He is not what he appears to be, Catherine. He never was. I wanted to tell you everything while I still could, but I knew you would confront him directly, and direct confrontation is exactly what he would expect. Derek is prepared for anger. He is prepared for accusations. What he is not prepared for is patience. What he doesn't understand is strategic silence. These are your greatest weapons, my love. Use them. Victoria has everything you need. She's been my dearest friend since law school, and she's the finest investigator I've ever known. I went to her 6 months ago with my concerns, and together we built something that Derek cannot easily dismantle. Trust Victoria as you trusted me. She will guide you through what comes next. And Catherine, find out who the woman in the photograph is. I've watched Derek meet with her on the first Saturday of every month for the past 2 years. He tells Emma he's playing golf with clients. He's lying. Whoever this woman is, she's part of something he doesn't want anyone to discover. I'm sorry I cannot be there to fight beside you, but I've done everything I could to fight for you from wherever I am going. Remember what I always told you. You have the mind of a chess player. It's time to use it. All my love, forever, James. I read the letter 3 times before I reached for Victoria Ashford's business card. The handwritten note on the back, my oldest friend, trust her completely, steadied my resolve. It was nearly 1 in the morning. Far too late for a phone call under normal circumstances. But nothing about this situation was normal, and I suspected Victoria had been waiting for this call for 3 years. She answered on the second ring. Catherine Vale. Her voice was warm but unsurprised. I wondered when I would hear from you. You knew James left me your card. I helped him write the letter. Victoria paused, and I heard the weight of memory in her silence. He came to me 6 months before he died. He had been watching Derek for years by then, documenting everything, building a case. He called what he left behind his insurance policy for you. I've kept it sealed and waiting, just as he asked. What's in it? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would change everything. That's not a conversation for the telephone, Catherine. We should meet tomorrow if you can manage it. My office is downtown, but I can come to you if that's easier. I'll come to you, I said. I need to get out of this house. Victoria gave me her address, and we agreed on 10 in the morning. Before I could hang up, she spoke again, her voice dropping to something more serious. Catherine, I need to prepare you for what you're going to see. James didn't just suspect Derek was dangerous. He investigated him thoroughly. What do you mean? Your husband hired me to dig into Derek's background, his history, his connections, his previous relationships. Victoria paused again. What I found, well, you need to see it yourself. Some things cannot be explained secondhand. The silence between us felt heavy with implication. I thought of the photograph, of Derek leaning toward that unknown woman with such familiar intimacy. I thought of Emma's casual mention of Derek having been through something like this before. I thought of all the small moments over the past 5 years that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now arranged themselves into a pattern I could not yet fully see. From Victoria, I said quietly, "What am I walking into?" And her response came slowly, each word chosen with care. Catherine, your husband didn't just love you. He built you a fortress from beyond the grave. But what's inside that fortress might change everything you thought you knew about your family. Victoria Ashford's office occupied the entire 3rd floor of a restored brownstone downtown. The kind of elegant professional space that suggested competence without ostentation. I arrived 15 minutes early and found her already waiting in the lobby, a silver-haired woman with penetrating gray eyes and the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades uncovering truths people desperately wanted to keep hidden. She embraced me briefly, and in that gesture, I felt echoes of James, of friendships that had spanned decades and survived everything life could throw at them. He talked about you constantly in those final months, Victoria said as she led me to her private office. not with sadness, with purpose. He was determined to leave you protected. The file waited on her desk, thick and organized, with the precision I recognized as James's handiwork. Victoria poured us both coffee, and then sat across from me as I began to read. What I found inside made the coffee grow cold in my cup. James's investigation had been thorough beyond anything I could have imagined. Victoria had documented Derek's movements, his meetings, his communications where possible. But the most damning evidence came from something far more mundane, his digital footprint, obtained through methods I chose not to question too closely. Page after page of screenshots showed Derek's internet search history over the past 4 years. How to convince a spouse to transfer property rights. Legal guardianship versus power of attorney, which is stronger? Signs of dementia that courts accept as evidence. How long does property transfer take after incompetency declaration? Controlling elderly parents' estate through conservatorship. He had been planning this for years, long before James died, long before the engagement party humiliation. Derek had been methodically researching how to take legal control of my life, and he had done so with the patience of someone who understood that such schemes require careful groundwork. Victoria let me absorb the documents before she spoke. "Catherine, I need you to understand what he's attempting. This isn't just about money, though the money is certainly part of it. If Derek succeeds in having you declared mentally unfit, he and Emma would become your legal conservators. They would control your bank accounts, your investments, your property. But it goes far beyond finances." She leaned forward, her expression grave. "Conservatorship means they decide where you live. They decide what medical treatment you receive. They can move you into a facility against your will. They can sell your home without your consent. They can cut you off from anyone they choose." Her voice softened. "You would be alive, Catherine, but you would be voiceless. Every decision about your existence would belong to them." The full scope of Derek's ambitions settled over me like a weight. I had assumed he wanted access to my accounts, perhaps control over the inheritance Emma would eventually receive. I had not understood that he wanted to erase me entirely, to reduce me to a breathing body while he pulled every string. "There's more," Victoria said quietly. She slid another folder across the desk. "The woman in the photograph. We identified her. Inside was a dossier on a woman named Melissa Chen, 43 years old, a licensed estate attorney specializing in conservatorship law. The photograph James had taken wasn't a secret affair. It was a business meeting. Derek had been consulting with a specialist in the exact legal mechanism he was planning to use against me. "She's good at what she does," Victoria said. Or rather, she was. 3 months ago, she was disbarred for helping a client fraudulently obtain conservatorship over an elderly parent. The family fought back, exposed the scheme, and Melissa lost everything. But before that happened, she had successfully helped Derek elsewhere. I looked up sharply. "What do you mean, elsewhere?" Victoria opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. "Derek Morrison isn't his real name. Or rather, it is now, but it wasn't always. 10 years ago, he was Derek Sutherland, married to a woman named Rachel, in Oregon. Rachel's father was a successful real estate developer worth about $8 million. My hands went cold. Derek married Rachel when she was 26. 2 years later, he initiated conservatorship proceedings against her father, claiming the man was mentally incompetent. The family fought back hard. They hired investigators, gathered evidence, and eventually proved that Derek had been manipulating Rachel, isolating her from her family, and planning to seize control of her father's estate. Victoria's voice hardened. The conservatorship petition failed. Rachel filed for divorce. Derek was facing fraud charges when suddenly everything went quiet. The family accepted a settlement. The court records were sealed. And Derek disappeared. He changed his name, moved across the country, and started over. I stared at the screen, at the documentation of a predator who had done this before. How did he find Emma? That's the truly disturbing part, Victoria said. We believe he targeted her specifically. Emma's social media profiles 5 years ago mentioned her father's declining health, your family's assets, the beach house. Derek didn't meet Emma by accident at that charity gala. He hunted her. The room felt colder suddenly. I thought of Emma, my brilliant, beautiful daughter, who had always been just a little too trusting, a little too eager to believe the best in people. I thought of how Derek had swept into her life with such perfect timing, such practiced charm. Does Emma know? I asked. About Oregon, about what he did? We don't believe so. Derek is very good at compartmentalization. He's rebuilt his entire identity. Unless someone specifically searches for Derek Sutherland in Oregon court records, there's no obvious connection. I closed the laptop and looked at Victoria. What else did James find? Everything you need to stop him. She pulled out another document. 3 years ago, while James was still alive, but already sick. He restructured your entire estate. Working with me and a team of attorneys, he created a trust with protections Derek cannot easily breach. She walked me through it. The Catherine and James Vale Family Trust named me as sole trustee of all our assets. The house, the beach property, the investments, the retirement accounts, everything James and I had built over 30 years of marriage was now protected within a legal structure that Derek could not touch. Emma remained a beneficiary, but she could only inherit under 2 conditions: if I voluntarily transferred assets to her, or after my natural death. There was no mechanism for her or anyone else to force a transfer. No conservatorship claim could circumvent the trust's protections. But the most powerful provision was the no contest clause. Victoria explained it carefully. If anyone challenges your mental competency in an attempt to gain control of the trust, and that challenge fails, they automatically forfeit all inheritance rights, permanently. No appeals, no second chances. She met my eyes. Derek cannot file for conservatorship without risking everything Emma stands to inherit. Your husband created a trap that punishes exactly the kind of attack Derek has been planning. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of James's foresight. Even while dying, even while his body failed him, he had been 3 steps ahead of everyone, building walls to protect me from a threat I hadn't even recognized. There's one more thing, Victoria said softly. She handed me a leather journal, smaller than the files, but somehow heavier. James kept this during his final year. He wanted you to read it when you were ready, when you understood what you were really fighting. I opened the journal to a random page and found an entry from 2 years before James died. I tried to warn Emma today. I sat her down and told her everything I suspected about Derek. I showed her some of the evidence Victoria had gathered. She accused me of being paranoid, of being jealous that another man had her loyalty, of never accepting her choices. She chose him over truth, over her own father's concerns. So I'm choosing to protect Catherine instead. I cannot save my daughter from her own blindness, but I can save my wife from its consequences. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I pray Emma learns hers before it destroys her completely. My hands trembled as I closed the journal. James had tried. He had done everything a father could do to protect both his wife and his daughter. But in the end, he had made the hardest choice of his life. He had chosen to save the person he could still reach. I looked at Victoria through tears I hadn't realized were falling. What do I do now? Now, Victoria's expression shifted to something that reminded me why she had been one of the most feared investigators in the state. Now we show Derek Morrison exactly what happens when you hunt a woman whose husband prepared her for war. I left Victoria's office with copies of everything James had compiled. and a mind churning with dark possibilities. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every red light an opportunity for my thoughts to spiral deeper into anger and disbelief. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the afternoon had faded into early evening, and I wanted nothing more than silence and solitude to process what I had learned. Instead, I found my granddaughter Sophia waiting on my front porch. My granddaughter stood as I approached, her expression caught between nervousness and determination. She was 21 years old, a junior at the state university, and until this moment, I had assumed she was entirely under her mother's influence. Seeing her here, alone, without Emma's knowledge, shifted something in my understanding. "Grandma, can we talk?" Her voice was steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "Inside, please." "I don't want anyone to see me here." We sat in the living room, and I noticed immediately how tightly she gripped her phone, clutching it against her chest like a talisman. Her eyes moved to the windows twice, checking for observers. Whatever she had come to say, it frightened her. "I know Derek isn't who he pretends to be," Sophia said finally. "I've known for a long time. I've been paying attention since Grandpa died, watching how he treats you, listening to what he and Mom say when they think no one important can hear." She paused, swallowing hard. "Grandpa talked to me before he passed. He told me to watch carefully. He said someday you would need someone on the inside." I stared at my granddaughter, seeing for the first time the resemblance that went beyond physical features. She had James's eyes, that sharp and knowing gaze that cut through pretense to find truth beneath. "What have you seen, Sophia?" She lifted her phone slightly, that device she had been clutching so desperately since she arrived. "I've been collecting evidence," she whispered, "for 3 years, since the day of Grandpa's funeral." Sophia's revelation changed everything. We talked for nearly 3 hours that evening, her voice dropping to a whisper whenever she shared details about Derek and Emma's behavior. She had witnessed conversations I never heard, observed manipulations I never saw, and recorded moments that Derek and Emma believed were private. But Sophia wasn't ready to share those recordings yet. She needed to know I had protection first, legal armor that would shield us both when the truth finally emerged. I promised to call her after I met with Victoria again. That meeting came 2 days later, this time in a conference room at Victoria's office where we could spread out all the evidence and begin building our strategy. Sophia arrived with her laptop and an expression of grim determination that made her look far older than 21. 32 recordings, she said, navigating to a folder on her computer. "Every conversation where Derek or Mom talked about their plans for you, every lie they told about your supposed dementia, every time they discussed what to do about the old woman." She paused, scrolling to a specific file. "And there's one recording where Derek talks about what happened to Rachel's father in Oregon, how he lost everything, how no one believed him until it was too late." Victoria and I exchanged glances. This was more than we had hoped for. This was Derek confessing in his own words to a pattern of predatory behavior. "Play number 8, Victoria said after reviewing Sophia's summary document. The recording filled the room. Emma's voice, speaking to someone on the phone, her tone casual and confident. "The beach house will be ours within 6 months. Once we get conservatorship, we control everything. Mom won't be able to stop us. Derek says his attorney friend knows exactly how to make it happen. And honestly, after how she's been acting, maybe it's for the best. She can't take care of herself anymore." The recording ended. I looked at my granddaughter, this 21-year-old woman who had spent 3 years building a case that professional investigators would envy. "Sophia," I said slowly, "you didn't just save me. You documented a conspiracy." Victoria was already reaching for her phone. "I need to call my contact at the State Bar Association. If Derek has been working with Melissa Chen after her disbarment, that's criminal. If Emma has been knowingly participating in a scheme to fraudulently attain conservatorship, that's elder abuse. Wait, I said. Both women looked at me. Before we expose everything, I need to know one more thing. The woman in James's photograph, the one Derek met every month, if it wasn't Melissa Chen, who was it? Victoria smiled grimly. That's where the story gets interesting. I finally identified her last week. Her name is Patricia Morrison, Derek's mother. The room went silent. His mother? I repeated. But Derek told Emma his parents were dead. He said they died in a car accident when he was in college. He's never mentioned any family. That's because Patricia Morrison was part of the Oregon scheme, Victoria explained. She helped Derek manipulate Rachel. She befriended Rachel's mother, gained the family's trust, and fed Derek inside information that helped him isolate Rachel from her support system. When the conservatorship plan fell apart and the truth came out, Patricia disappeared along with Derek. Victoria pulled up a photograph on her laptop. She's been living in a retirement community about 50 miles from here for the past 4 years. Derek visits her twice a month and gives her money from the allowance Emma thinks he's spending on golf. They've been planning this together from the beginning. I thought about all the times Derek had claimed to be playing golf on Saturday mornings. All the times Emma had defended his need for regular alone time to decompress from work stress. The layers of deception ran so deep that I wondered if Emma had ever really known the man she married, or if she had fallen in love with a carefully constructed fiction. "Show me recording 23, I said to Sophia. She clicked the file, and Derek's voice filled the room. He was speaking to someone, his tone dropping to the conspiratorial register of a man sharing secrets he believed were safe. My mother was right. Find a woman with a wealthy parent, especially one whose father is declining or recently widowed. They're vulnerable, desperate for someone to share the burden of caregiving. You become their hero, their protector, and they never see you positioning yourself to take everything. Emma was perfect. Successful attorney mother, recently dead father, valuable property, and enough guilt about her relationship with her parents that she'd believe anything I told her about Catherine being difficult. I barely had to do anything. She isolated herself from her mother without me pushing. The recording continued for another minute, but I had stopped processing the words. This wasn't just betrayal. This was systematic predation. Derek hadn't just targeted me. He had targeted my daughter's love for her father, her guilt about not spending more time with us, her fear of being alone. When the recording ended, Victoria spoke into the heavy silence. "Catherine, we have enough evidence to destroy him. We can file criminal charges, expose the Oregon connection, present these recordings to the district attorney. Derek could face prison time." "But," I heard the hesitation in her voice, "but Emma is implicated in many of these recordings. She may not have known about Oregon, but she participated in the current scheme. If we expose Derek, we expose her too." I looked at Sophia. At this young woman who had spent 3 years documenting her own mother's crimes out of loyalty to her grandmother and grandfather. "What do you think I should do? If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you." Sophia met my eyes without flinching. "I think you should give Mom one chance to choose differently. Show her the evidence. Let her see what Derek really is. If she still chooses him after knowing the truth, then she's made her decision and deserves the consequences." It was the answer James would have given. 3 days later, I invited Emma to my home. "Just the two of us," I said, mother and daughter. We needed to talk without Derek's presence complicating things. She arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably as always, her expression arranged into that familiar mask of patient concern she had been wearing since the engagement party. We sat in the living room, where James's portrait still hung above the fireplace. I had arranged the space carefully, with all the evidence laid out on the coffee table between us. The journal, the recordings, the Oregon court documents, Victoria's investigation file. Everything. "What is all this?" Emma asked, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "This," I said quietly, "is the truth about the man you're planning to marry." I watched my daughter's face as I walked her through it all. The Oregon case, Derek's real history, Patricia Morrison, the recordings where Derek discussed his strategies for manipulation, the evidence of his long-term planning to seize control of my estate and eventually Emma's inheritance. With each revelation, Emma's expression shifted. Denial gave way to confusion. Confusion to horror. Horror to something that looked like the shattering of a fundamental reality. When I played the recording of Derek describing Emma as perfect for his scheme, describing how easy she had been to manipulate, my daughter's composure finally broke. She cried for a long time. Not the delicate tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the raw, ugly sobbing of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. When she could finally speak, her voice was hoarse and broken. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About Derek's history. A few weeks. About his plans for me? Since the engagement party." I leaned forward. "But Emma, your father knew. 3 years ago, while he was dying, he knew. He tried to warn you." She covered her face with her hands. "I called him paranoid. I told him he was jealous and controlling. Those were the last real conversations I had with Dad before he died, and I spent them defending Derek. Your father forgave you before he died," I said gently. "He built all of this protection not to punish you, but to save us both. The question now is, what are you going to do?" Strong and Emma looked at the evidence spread between us, at 3 years of her life recontextualized as a lie. "I need to leave him. Obviously. But Mom, I've been helping him. These recordings, some of this happened because I believed his lies about you. If this goes public, I could face charges too." "That depends on what you do next," I said. "Victoria believes that if you cooperate fully, if you testify about Derek's manipulation and help us build the criminal case against him, the district attorney might grant you immunity. You were a victim too, Emma. You were targeted and manipulated by someone who made this his profession." She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Why would you help me after everything I've done?" "Because you're my daughter. Because I love you. Because your father loved you enough to build protections that would save both of us." I reached across the table and took her hand. "But Emma, this only works if you choose truth over loyalty to Derek. If you choose your family over a man who was never anything but a con artist." My daughter squeezed my hand and nodded. "What do we do?" What we did was methodical, strategic, and utterly devastating to Derek Morrison's carefully constructed life. With Emma's cooperation and Sophia's recordings, Victoria compiled a case that the district attorney called the most comprehensive documentation of elder financial exploitation I've seen in 20 years. Derek was arrested 4 weeks after our conversation, charged with attempted conservatorship fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit theft, and half a dozen related crimes. The Oregon connection added another layer. Rachel's family, who had been waiting 10 years for justice, provided additional testimony. Patricia Morrison was charged as an accomplice. The prosecution was airtight. Derek's attorney tried to claim that Emma had been the mastermind, that Derek was simply following his fiancé's instructions to help with her difficult mother. But the recordings destroyed that defense. Emma's testimony, detailing years of manipulation and isolation tactics, painted a clear picture of who the real predator was. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Emma on one side and Sophia on the other. Watching Derek's confident facade crack as witness after witness exposed his schemes was not satisfying in the way I imagined revenge might be. It was simply necessary, a wound being cleaned before it could heal. He was convicted on all counts. The judge, a stern woman named Helena Rodriguez, who had presided over family court for 15 years, looked at Derek with open contempt during sentencing. "You are a predator of the worst kind," she said. "You target families in their most vulnerable moments. You manipulate love into isolation, trust into control. You have done this before, and you would have done it again if not for the extraordinary foresight of a dying man who loved his wife enough to protect her from beyond the grave." She sentenced Derek to 12 years in prison. Patricia Morrison received 5 years for her role as an accomplice. Emma and I sat in the courthouse lobby after the verdict, neither of us speaking for a long time. Finally, she turned to me with tears streaming down her face. "I wasted 5 years of my life with him, Mom. 5 years believing his lies, pushing you away, missing the last years I could have had with Dad. How do I come back from that?" "The same way I came back from grief," I said, "one day at a time, with honesty and patience and the understanding that healing isn't linear." She nodded slowly. "I want to help other people. People like me who got manipulated by someone they trusted. Is that crazy?" "No, sweetheart. That's purpose." 6 months after Derek's conviction, Emma and I established the James Vale Foundation for Elder Protection and Family Advocacy. Victoria served as legal director. Sophia, who had changed her major to social work, joined as youth outreach coordinator. The foundation provides legal resources, investigative support, and counseling services to families facing financial exploitation. We help people recognize warning signs, document abuse, and fight back before it's too late. Every time someone walks through our doors with that familiar look of confusion and betrayal in their eyes, I think of James, of the fortress he built to save me, and I know we're doing the work he would have wanted. Emma and I have dinner together every Sunday now. Sometimes we talk about light things, easy topics that don't carry weight. Sometimes we talk about Derek, about the warning signs she missed, about the guilt she still carries. Those conversations are harder, but they're honest in ways our relationship never was before. Sophia graduated with honors and now works full-time for the foundation. She gives presentations at senior centers and community organizations, teaching people about the tactics predators use and the importance of documentation. She tells my story, tells Emma's story, helps others understand that even smart, successful families can fall victim to someone who makes manipulation their life's work. I still live in the house James and I shared. I tend his garden every morning. I sit at his desk sometimes and talk to him about my day, about Emma's progress, about Sophia's achievements. I tell him that we won, that his fortress held, that the future he prepared for me became something bigger than either of us imagined. And every time I walk past the beach house, the property Derek tried so hard to steal, I think about the morning after the engagement party, when Emma called asking me to sign it over. I think about how close I came to compliance, to believing their lies about my confusion and decline. But James knew me better than I knew myself. He knew I had a fighter buried beneath grief and loneliness. He knew I just needed the right weapons and the right moment. The beach house is now the foundation's headquarters. We hold support groups there, legal clinics, training sessions for caregivers and family members. The place Derek wanted to take from me became a sanctuary for people fighting the same battle I fought. Last week, a woman came to one of our workshops. She was 58, recently widowed, and her son's new girlfriend had begun suggesting she needed help managing her affairs. The warning signs were all there. Isolation tactics, questions about property ownership, suggestions that her grief had affected her judgment. We gave her the tools she needed: legal referrals, documentation strategies, a support network. 3 days later, she called to say she had confronted her son with evidence of his girlfriend's past. a history of targeting vulnerable widows that was remarkably similar to Derek's pattern. Her son chose to believe her. He ended the relationship and apologized with tears in his eyes for ever doubting his mother. Not every story ends that way. Some families cannot be saved. Some people choose the predator over truth, and we cannot help them until they're ready to help themselves. But enough families do choose differently. Enough people fight back and win. That's what James's legacy has become. Not just protection for one woman, but a blueprint for fighting back against people who believe grief makes us weak, age makes us vulnerable, and love makes us blind. I'm 52 years old. I'm a widow. I'm a mother whose daughter once betrayed her and then found the courage to choose differently. I'm a grandmother whose granddaughter proved that the next generation can be just as fierce as those who came before. And I'm a woman who learned that the most powerful weapon against betrayal isn't anger or revenge. It's patience, strategy, and the willingness to fight for yourself when everyone expects you to surrender. Strong, if you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. And what would you do if the people you trusted most tried to erase you? Would you fight back, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes knowing we're not alone is the first step toward healing. If this story moved you, subscribe for more stories about family, justice, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your life. And remember, the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's living well with your dignity intact and the people who truly love you by your side. Catherine Vale's story reminds us that the people who try to diminish us often underestimate the quiet strength we carry within. She faced betrayal from her own daughter, public humiliation designed to break her spirit, and a calculated scheme to erase her voice from her own life. But she also had something her enemies never anticipated: a husband who loved her enough to fight for her even after death, a granddaughter brave enough to document the truth, and the patience to wait until justice could be served on her terms. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming dignity when others try to strip it away. It's about the power of preparation, the importance of documentation, and the knowledge that legal protections exist for those who seek them. Elder financial abuse affects millions of families every year, often perpetrated by the very people victims trust most. If Catherine's journey resonates with you, perhaps it's time to have difficult conversations with loved ones, to understand what legal safeguards are available, and to pay attention when something feels wrong. We would love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where family members tried to take advantage of your trust? How did you respond? What advice would you give to others who might be experiencing something similar? Your story could be the one that helps someone else find the courage to fight back. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are never too old to stand up for yourself, and it is never too late to choose the life you deserve. Breakt RP.